coach Izzy here, and I am going to tell you all about the 7 prime movements that our body can do. Now, these are all things you're probably used to doing on the weight floor, but they are things that are really good to be aware of, these 7 prime movements, so that every time we go into one of these prime movements, we have all these tips running through our head, and so we can get into that perfect form every time. I'm going to take you through good things to know and things to avoid. Right, so first up, gang, I'm going to take you through the hip hinge. Now, clues in the name, we are literally going to be hinging at those hips. We want to make sure our feet are hip width apart. Good way to do that, turn those feet out and then get them in line. That will get you your hip width. Once you've done that, we want to soften those knees. We're going to be sending the hips all the way back. I always say, like you're trying to close a car door with your butt. We want a nice flat line through that body, so we should get a straight line from the tip of that crown of the head all the way through to the tailbone, and then we're leading with the hips, so we're going to feel that engagement in the glutes and the hamstrings as we push those hips back in, and again, extending all the way down and back up again. Great one for working the posterior chain. What we don't want to see is leading with the shoulders. Always lead with those hips. Okay, gang, so next up, I'm going to talk about the squat. We want to have our feet about hip to shoulder width apart for this one. Again, we can use that method of turning the feet out and bring them parallel. And another thing to bear in mind with the squat is you might want your feet completely parallel, facing forward, or you might want a slight turn out, depending on where your hips are positioned. One or the other is going to feel better for you. Once you've done that, gotten everything in position, we're going to be driving our hips back, just like in the hip hinge, but this time we keep our chest proud. All right, we're going to drive through the heels to come back up again. That weight wants to stay right back in those heels, almost as if we could curl our toes up from the floor. Again, driving through, we're going to engage those quads a lot more than we were previously in that hip hinge, but still getting that posterior chain as well. All right, team, that is the squat. All right, guys, so next up I'm going to talk about the lunge, another very important prime movement that we can do with our bodies. So we can do lots of different types of lunges in lots of different planes of motion, but let's talk about the reverse lunge. So when we're stepping into a reverse lunge, we want to end up with those right angles. So whenever we're doing a lunge, we want to think about that knee. It wants to be over that ankle, taking that weight into the heel just like we did with the squat. The other leg is also in that 90-degree bend. When we stand back up, we want to press through that heel to stand back up again and engage that posterior chain. When we're traveling into a lunge, we also want to think about the plane of motion we're traveling in. So we only ever want to travel in that straight line, not kind of leaning into it forward or back, so that weight is going to be distributed right through that center point. That, my friends, is the lunge. Up next, gang, we're going to talk about push. So push is used in loads of different workouts. Obviously, if we're doing pushing motions, like push-ups is a great example of that. Other than that, though, think about things like chest press. Anything where we're pushing a weight away from us, whether it be face down or face up, is going to be a pushing motion. So, for instance, when we get, let's say, into a push-up, we really want to focus on pushing the ground away from us. That's always a great cue with these. When we drop into it, it's that 45-degree bend for a push-up from the rib cage as we come back through. Like I say, we're pushing that ground away from us. Whereas when we're actually going into a chest press, we're obviously fighting gravity in the other way to press those weights away from us. But that, my friends, is the push. Okay, team, so next up is the pull. As you might think, it is the complete opposite of a push. We are going to be pulling weights up towards us, for instance, in a low row, as so. Other ways we could do this is things like, rows are a really good example. Hip hinge, add in that low row. High rows, bicep curls. Thinking if you're laying on the bench, when we do things like pullovers, laying down flat on the bench, all of these motions are pulling motions. And it is very important that we get those pulling motions done to counter condition our bodies for the pushing motions that we do. The two work in perfect balance and unison as long as we condition ourselves in both ways. Okay guys, so next up I'm going to talk about the twist. So this is another very important motion. We don't get a lot of movements that move through this plane of motion. This particular plane is called the transverse plane, and it is that rotation that we get through the center of our body. So a good example would be a seated torso rotation. So sitting right up out of those hips and rotating one way and then the other. Now with these ones, it tends to be a very small motion because of the fact our spine doesn't rotate that much. Other examples of this would be things like wood choppers, or even a lunge with a torso rotation. We often do those too, combining those two prime movements together, the lunge and the twist. And last up in our 7 prime movements that our bodies can do is gait. Now gait, we often talk about when we're referring to the treadmills. That is a lot of the time that we'll be thinking about our gait. But we will use it in weight floor exercises as well, for instance, stepping motions. So you think about things like a walking lunge, you may do those, you're taking it through that stepping motion. So anything where you do get that motion almost as if you're walking or running is going to be one that involves gait. Let's say an ISO front walk squat. So, you know, when we sit into those squats and we walk forward, we're using gait for that one as well as squat. So there's lots of ways that we do use these 7 different movements together, but I hope that has really helped you understand the ways our bodies can move and the right ways to get it done.